We had been on vacation, and this was our last week of vacation. And we set up camp on, I think, just the day before the earthquake. And Steve had been sick, so he was in the same end of the tent with us. We had an 18-foot tent. And when the earthquake started, it was just like the ground was ocean waves, and the noise you can't believe. I looked out the tent flap and saw this wall of water, rocks, trees, and whatever, because it was a beautiful moonlight night. After that, you couldn't see anything because of the dust. I yelled at Ray, I said, "Let's get out of here." And he reached over and grabbed Steve, and all he saw of Steve was just an arm and a head because that part of the tent had collapsed. And we got outside the tent and drew a blank there for a while. The next thing I remember was we had Steve in the front seat of the station wagon, and Ray was trying to move it, and it wouldn't move. And he turned the lights on in the station wagon, and then people started coming. "Don't leave, don't leave." The painter girl came running. She said, "My mother's lost her arm. Don't leave us." And that was the first injured one that I encountered, was Mrs. Painter. Ray had tried to move the station wagon, but it had got shoved up against some trees, and there was a tree underneath the station wagon, so it wouldn't have moved anyway. So we started getting busy. Then we drug a footlocker out of the tent with our clothes in it and clothed ourselves and whoever else we could from what was in our trunk, because the force of that slide going down knocked people out of their tents, their trailers, but also knocked their clothes off in lots of instances. They were not clad at all. We happened to be on a ridge in the campground, so that we weren't as bad off as a lot of people. In fact, we were very lucky where we were. The people across the road from us, across the road from us, and the river was on the other side of them, and they were the ones that were so severely injured. The people about 15 feet from us were in the campground that we really stayed in most of the time that we were there, and they were some of the injured too, but they weren't as severely injured as the ones that were closer to the river. I don't know how many people I took care of then. The mind has a wonderful way of forgetting things. Not only that, but age does too. But we ended up taking care of a number of people there from what they told afterwards. And then somebody said, "We got to get out of here because the dam's going." So we went up to where the highway was higher than the rest of it. And we went up to the highway, and I think I went in the station wagon with Gil Gunderson from Bellevue, Washington. And in the back of it, they'd already put Mrs. Painter, I don't mean Painter, Margaret Holmes and Verona Holmes. And Ray doesn't remember who he went out with, but we went up to what they call Refugee Point now. And there's where I took care of the injured people the rest of the night. I used towels and sheets and whatever I could for bandaging. Actually, my first aid training came in real handy for bandaging and taking care of these people. Shock was something I learned from nurses training, but taking care of these people and bandaging them was a lot of it was first aid. So that was a big part of that. And I would repeatedly go around checking on all these different people because they had lost blood, not only the shock of being in an earthquake, but they also had physical and mental shock too. So I would go around and check on them quite often. Most of the bleeding had stopped. There wasn't nothing that was gushing or anything because these people were lying a lot of times on their injuries. One injury, I don't know if I should say actually who it was, I could have literally laid my forearm down on the bone on her thigh. So you know the injuries were severe. There were mangled arms and legs and internal injuries. Well, actually, by the time it started getting light, I got 2 more patients. They were the malts that had climbed the tree all night long. As the water kept coming up, they kept going higher up in the tree. And they came, and they were, of course, chilled to the bone, because after all, they were in their early 70s and had spent the night in this cold air and cold water. So we brought them in, put them in the front seat of a car, and stuffed them in sleeping bags. And I can remember offering her a drink of whiskey. Somebody had a bottle of whiskey there. I offered it to him, and he turned it down. He was a minister. He wasn't going to drink that whiskey. But she took it. But later she wrote and told me that she left it on the floor all over the helicopter, too. But I think probably I was one of the most fortunate people in there for the simple reason I was busy. I couldn't stop and think about things that might happen or had happened, or all the rumors that were spread around. I could give encouragement to these people by saying help would come, because that wasn't something that was going to get ignored, what happened there. So I could give them encouragement, and which seemed to calm them, to know that somebody was there that was trying to help. But during the night when the thunderstorm came up, it started making them a little bit more anxious, because the thunder was just about like having more quakes. The only thing is, we were having more quakes, and the thunder kind of masked them in a way. So it made it a little bit more tolerable. Otherwise, we got told to move up. Now, I'm not the only one that helped people. Everybody in there, I would say, was a helper. They were doing something, because I didn't have to ask for anything but what it wasn't right there. The only thing I could have asked for more was plasma to help the fluids for the people that were injured. There was a dentist in there that brought me some codeine and Demerol, and I don't even remember whether I used them or not, because I was a little bit leery about what people could tolerate. But I did use some aspirin that helped make them think that they were getting something and relieve them a little bit. And at 9 o'clock, Dr. Bayless came in from Bozeman. He had an office in West Yellowstone, and he flew over the area, and he knew that somebody had to be hurt in that. So he and his nurse came down by boat to the dam and then came in there. And he gave people narcotics to relieve their pain and checked on them and got out of there as soon as he could so that he could arrange for help outside. About 9:30, the smoke jumpers came in. And the smoke jumpers had to make 3 passes over the area they wanted to drop into, because there were so many sightseeing planes in the way. And they said that the last pass they made, they were going to ram somebody if they didn't get out of the way. But they came in there and started setting up a place for the helicopters to land to take out the injured. And everybody had been moved up to the dam area, Hebgen Dam, and they fixed the place between the spillway and the outlet for the helicopter to land. And there wasn't a worse place in the canyon for it to land than there, I don't think, because there were big power poles over the top of the dam. It was a narrow canyon, and of course it was shaking all the time. And the spillway was badly damaged. But anyway, that's where the first 4 people were evacuated by the big helicopter. And the smaller helicopter came in and evacuated a couple of them from the road there. And the road coming down off of the dam area had a huge boulder in the middle of it. And there were cracks around on the hillside and in the roads there too. And of course the air smelled of sulfur all night long. But they took those 2 helicopter loads, and then they said there was a place down below where they could get in and out of a lot easier. And that's where we'd spent the night, on Refuge Point. That's where we should have stayed in the first place. But we had lots of chiefs and no Indians in a lot of places. But we also had a lot of very helpful Indians. Everybody was helpful. I couldn't ask for anything but what it wasn't granted if it was available. So that wasn't a problem in that instance. It took until 3 o'clock in the afternoon before everybody was evacuated that wanted to go. And we heard somebody say the helicopter was leaving and nobody wanted to go about 5:30. Well, we wanted to go. There's nothing to keep us in that area any longer. The second doctor that had come in had even brought in snake venom in case it was needed during the night, and all kinds of medications to be used if we stayed in there that night. So I left that with the other nurse that was in the area. And we left, and we were really glad to get off that trembling earth, because the tremors were getting stronger as evening came along. And we flew up to Kirkwood Ranch, excuse me, and the road was dozed out shortly thereafter. And this Gil Gunderson, whose station wagon we'd had as kind of like headquarters all during this time, had promised that he'd bring us home to Billings. And he was coming out of there sooner than we realized he was going to, and had already gone by. And a man from Salt Lake City said that he would take us to catch up with him, which we did. We caught up with him down the Gallatin Canyon a little bit farther on down when he'd stopped to clean out his car. And Gil Gunderson and his 15-year-old nephew, Jimmy Willie, brought us home to Billings. They spent the night with us then, and then they went back on their own merry way. Quite a long detour, but I think a lot of us got detoured that day.